Here is the Marseille Tarot traditional depiction of the Fool. He's a traveling jester entertainer, he's being harassed by an animal, and he carries all of his meager possessions with him. Here's one of the very earliest tarot depictions of the Fool, and he's also a pretty down-on-his-luck looking guy with his threadbare clothing. Now here's the Rider-Waite Smith, modern, traditional, if you will, depiction of the same card, and here things have really changed, right? He's a much happier looking, cleaner looking figure, but you can see kind of the resemblance to the original depictions, or the points of resemblance. But now what we're here for, this character in the overall popular imagination, not just as a tarot character. And we're starting off, as you can see, with these medieval manuscript type illustrations, and as you'll see in the video overall, there's a lot of different depictions of this character. It's very prevalent, but definitely some common themes. You see that staff there? It reminds us of the one from the earliest tarot image, as opposed to this one here, which is much more typical. And the facial expressions are fascinating. Sometimes they have this kind of vacant look. One of his early tarot names was the Madman, but then sometimes he looks really shrewd as well. This costume I thought was pretty exceptional out of the group, so I wanted to include that. And now notice the small animal and staff on the left. Certainly reminds us of the Tarot Fool, even though that's a rabbit, but still. Looks similar overall, he's got the exposed legs, the very simple staff. He's a solitary figure a lot, like here. But then in contrast, of course, you'll have these party scenes. Notice the lack of pants in this image and the next one. You know, the Fool could break taboos, so the aristocracy weren't allowed to walk around without pants, but he could. And that wasn't the only taboo they broke. They could make lusty, comical advances on women and get away with it. I actually mentioned that in my sap book, of all places. So this one's kind of in that vein. There's an inappropriate air to it, at least. But that's the kind of thing they would do. Not just that, but in large celebrations and festivals like this. Isn't that a great image? Here's maybe their most famous representation. And yeah, they did not specialize in highbrow entertainment. In some ways, they were the butt of jokes themselves, right? They were not a high-ranking figure in society, far from it. They were at the lowest rung, but then they had kind of a special exemption that allowed them to act like this. And yet they could be portrayed even inside of a church, like here. The Tarot Fool seems to be traveling, so here's a couple of images that at least have a similarity to that. Here he's by himself on a horse. I don't know what the joke was behind this image, but he is at least on his own out in the wilderness with a staff. Here we have him or them with animals, which of course is portrayed on the tarot card as well. And you know, their costume often emulated an animal. They have the donkey ears or whatnot. And speaking of that theme, and particularly of this small creature that we see in the classic tarot depiction, this one seems to resonate with that a lot. Along those same lines, see the little critter almost hidden here. That's a small detail because we'll pan out to the entire image. There you go. And plus, that's just a great image. So what we've seen so far is, you know, these portrayals of the character that definitely rhyme with the things you see in the original tarot images, the early ones, the real traditional ones. He entertains all levels of society, from royalty to common people on the street, but he's pretty crass and lowly. The facial expressions sometimes indicate why he was often considered insane or disturbed, and you can see that here. But he was also a wanderer. And here we've got an old fool, so he's been plying this craft for a long time, but he's, as you're going to see, he's just still on the road. On his own. He looks like he could be the tarot's fool way later in life. And speaking of the fool later in life, look at that. What an incredible visual. And notice the cat. So once again, we have the small animal accompanying our character. This image I just love, and regret not putting it in my sap book, but, you know, couldn't include them all. Well, at least I get to share it on this video. Yeah, so kind of circling back then, you know, the Fool is a character of extremes, right? He can be extremely happy and jovial, obviously, but he could also be really sad. And people were really aware of this. This is part of the image of the Fool in the popular consciousness in and around the time of the tarot's invention. I mean, this one here is very striking, but you can see how it's not the only visual version of the Fool that stresses this side of things. So speaking of the Fool and the tarot overall, I liked looking for images that link different characters from the tarot. So this one here, as well as this one, we've got Death and the Fool. And it's unsurprising to see them together because they're both depicted so often in popular art. And then this one I thought was really interesting because it almost combines them. In art of the time, death was often paired up with different people from society, the message being that everybody dies eventually, so he leads everybody away. That's one example. This one here reminded me of the Magician card, just a little bit. So we have the Fool at the table, the knife. I mean, this one seems more coincidental than anything else. I'll show you an image like this that's much closer to the Magician card in the follow-up video to this when we talk about the Magician. So yeah, the Fool is just a very striking, enigmatic figure. It's no surprise he was depicted so often. There's kind of a mystery to him. Love the mischievous look here. And he was so fascinating that he managed to survive all the way into modernity, right? He's the Joker, as seen in this modern card. But back to the main point of the video, what would the Fool have implied to people at the time of the card's creation? Well, the different things we've seen in the video so far, right? So kind of a disturbed quality, a little bit of a sad quality, but also the ability to break rules, to break taboos, to do things that normally can't be done. An unconventional life, the roaming, the wandering. Most people back then were unlikely to have seen much outside of their own village or town. Think of like the 20th century carny as a modern equivalent in that particular aspect. So there you go, kind of a visuals-based exercise in understanding the cultural context of the first of the major arcana cards, the Fool.